Hi everyone, my name is Emily Sweeney and I will be your virtual host today as we discuss two present-day conservation strategies. Thank you all for joining me. So, new research shows that some of the least protected regions in the United States are home to some of the most vulnerable species. What do you think of when you hear the word conservation? Maybe Yellowstone National Park, or areas with rare species. Today, conservation is more than preserving beautiful natural sites. We will be reviewing two methods based on journal articles about how we can approach conservation in the future. The articles discuss how to decide what to conserve. Should it be based on covering vast areas or where certain species reside? We will also talk about economics when conserving land, as often we have to purchase it, so we want to make sure we're using our resources to maximize our return. And finally, we will close today with a Minnesota connection, discussing conservation mapping and the prairie chicken. This GIS map contains many layers. Slope is shown with a red and green scale, red being the steepest points. A digital elevation model supports this, as the yellow to red areas represent higher elevation. See the lighter and darker circles on the map? These represent a lot of information. The circles take into account protected public lands, which are located, and a centroid is placed to identify each. The area around the centroid is expanded, and the circles are laid on top of each other. More overlap creates a darker circle, showing that many protected public lands are near or intersect with that area. This map serves as an introduction to the Jenkins article, called Conservation Mismatch, which says that places we have focused conservation efforts on in the past are not places of priority conservation today. As you can see, a lot of the conservation areas are focused out to the west. These areas could be considered easier to conserve because they are located in steep, elevated places that are hard to farm and remote to access. This is a map I created on GIS which displays Jenkins' priority areas. The greatest priority areas are shown in red, and the lowest are shown in green. In Jenkins' article, the red areas depict the location of endemic species and where small-range species are also often located. There is frequent overlap between these two requirements. Jenkins' paper includes maps like the one you see here, which analyze the ranges of more than 1,200 endemic species and the proportion of their ranges that's protected. They found that the vast majority of vulnerable animals and trees appear only in a few places. As you can see, the southeast has some of the highest scores on the map. The situation is dire for species like mussels and crayfish, where the diversity is greater than anywhere else on Earth. Some of these species are already extinct. And here is the other side of the story. The counter to Jenkins' article states that effective conservation requires clear objectives and prioritizing actions, not places or species. Conservation plans should consider at least some of the economic, political, and social constraints on actions. The Jenkins rebuttal article states that land with the highest number of endemics in the East has the lowest levels of protection because the land is most valuable for agriculture and development. Variation in cost needs to be considered, especially when prioritizing actions to save those species. Acknowledging costs can help us consider why certain areas are protected. This map shows the public protected lands in the United States. Many existing protected areas in the U.S. were designated because they were inexpensive or had impressive scenery, not because of their biological importance. So, are there any solutions? Given that habitat loss is the primary threat to species survival, society and the places we choose to protect will largely determine how many and which species survive. Jenkins suggests conservation easements as one way to combat this problem. The article that rebuttals him also suggests conservation easements, but notes that socioeconomic variation and the cost of land will be major factors in conserving these areas. So after reading both articles, I saw umbrella or wide-range species mentioned, but not to an in-depth extent. Jenkins noted that birds are doing fairly well compared with other taxa, thanks to their mobility. Still, though, 15 endemic species of birds located in the lower 48 are at risk, which leads me to my research question. Can mapping the ranges of umbrella species be valuable in measuring priority conservation areas? And of course, to bring it back to my home, Minnesota, I found a study about the prairie chicken that was conducted. The prairie chicken makes a good umbrella species example in this region because it depends on large, permanent grassland and other habitat types for cover, nesting, brood rearing, concealment from predators, and food. Using the greater prairie chicken as an umbrella species for conservation planning in this landscape, the study selected conservation areas based on various levels of vegetation patches and types of booming ground. They evaluated the vegetation patches based on their geographic overlap with other biologically important land and the location of selected species and natural communities. Their hypothesis was that selecting grassland vegetation patches based on the habitat requirements of the greater prairie chicken would incorporate more species and natural communities of conservation concern than simply selecting the largest patches of natural vegetation. The study found promising correlations that the location and identification of umbrella species could impact conservation plans, especially with regard to their relationship with other plant and animal species. In the future, in order to solidify this argument, we could map other umbrella species and see how these results compare to Jenkins' priority conservation areas. I just want to take a quick second to point out my data sources and the references I used to make this presentation possible. Thank you all for watching, have a great day, and I hope you found some insight to take home and apply to your own studies about conservation planning.